Picture the scene. A bartender grabs a filthy rag, smears it across the bar top, and accidentally knocks a cockroach into someone's drink. Nearby, two men are brawling, one of them barefoot because he bet his boots in a card game. The air reeks of stale beer, sweat, and something you'd rather not identify. This isn't the Wild West Saloon from Hollywood. This is the real deal. Loud, lawless, and soaked in filth. And if you think this place is where epic gunfights went down, I've got some bad news. Today, we're tearing down the silver screen fantasy to reveal the brutal, stinking truth about Wild West saloons. And trust me, they were far nastier than you've been led to believe. If you enjoy digging up the raw, unfiltered history of the Old West, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an adventure into the past. Now, let's push through the crowd and see what really happened inside these saloons. Number 1, the building itself. If you want to know how wild a town really was, just look at its saloon. First, erase the image of those grand wooden saloons from your mind. The very first saloons were nothing but temporary shelters. In brand new mining camps or railroad towns, the saloon was often the first business to pop up, sometimes as a flimsy tent, a rough sod hut, or a makeshift shack thrown together with whatever scraps were lying around. As the town grew, these crude structures would be replaced by simple wooden buildings, often with a false front designed to make them look bigger and sturdier than they really were. It was all about faking stability in a place where nothing lasted. But here's the part Hollywood never shows you. These places weren't filled with gamblers in fancy vests or heroic gunslingers. Most of the time, they were packed with exhausted, dirt-caked men, miners, cowboys, drifters, all looking for one thing: a place to drown their day in cheap whiskey. And the very first thing to hit you when you stepped inside wasn't the atmosphere, it was the stench. A choking, foul cocktail of stale beer, bottom-shelf whiskey, sweat-soaked bodies, and a fog of heavy tobacco smoke. Imagine the worst dive bar you've ever been in, then multiply it by 10. Every time those doors creaked open, another wave of dust and manure from the dirt streets outside would sweep in and blend with the stink. The sounds weren't much better. Live music was a rare luxury. Most of the time, it was just a low murmur of hushed conversations, broken up by the hacking coughs of men who'd long given up on their lungs. Visually, it was pure grime. The floorboards were rough planks, layered with sawdust to soak up spilled drinks and tobacco spit, turning the floor into a damp, slimy mess. The bar top was sticky to the touch, and the weak glow of smoky kerosene lamps barely pierced through the thick haze inside. And those iconic bat-wing doors, they weren't made for showdowns. They were just a desperate attempt to let some of the stench escape. And if you think the building was bad, wait until you see what they actually served behind that bar. Number 2, a hotbed for sickness. Wild West saloons weren't just dirty, they were disease factories. The real dangers inside weren't gunfights, they were invisible, crawling through the air and clinging to every surface. For most people on the frontier, taking a bath was a major ordeal. Water had to be hauled by hand, heated over a fire, and reused by the entire family. Dad went first, the youngest child went last. By then the water was ice cold and murky with grime. And it wasn't just personal hygiene that was a disaster. Dental care was barbaric. People would use a knife to scrape food from between their teeth. If a tooth got infected, you'd head to the barber or blacksmith who'd rip it out with pliers while you gritted through a shot of whiskey. No anesthetic, no sterilization. But even if you somehow kept yourself clean, the towns themselves were filthy. There were no sewer systems. Human and animal waste was dumped just outside town, but it didn't stay there. It was constantly tracked back in on boots, wagon wheels, and horseshoes. And that filth always found its way into the saloon. Inside, pests ruled. Lice, flies, cockroaches, they didn't just infest the saloon. Once they got on you, they came home with you. It was a losing battle. This perfect storm of bad hygiene, no sanitation, and pest infestations turned saloons into prime hubs for spreading deadly diseases. Cholera could tear through a saloon in days, passed along by shared unwashed glasses. Tuberculosis thrived in the smoke-clogged, poorly ventilated rooms. Smallpox, one of the deadliest viruses of the era, would have spread like wildfire through a packed saloon crowd. In truth, a bullet wasn't your biggest threat inside a saloon. The real killer was disease. And the worst part, the very thing you came in for, a drink, was often just as deadly. Number 3, the whiskey was poisoned. Beyond the dirt you could see, and the diseases you couldn't, there was another danger that flowed straight into every glass: the liquor itself. The whiskey cowboys drank wasn't smooth, aged bourbon. Most of the time, it was a foul and hazardous brew, known by names like coffin varnish, tarantula juice, or rotgut. Real barrel-aged whiskey was a rare and expensive treat. But to meet the endless demand for cheap booze, saloon keepers had a quicker solution: fake whiskey. And that's when things got truly dangerous. The base was crude grain alcohol, cheap, raw, and potent. To give it the appearance of whiskey, they'd stir in burnt sugar for color and drop in a wad of chewing tobacco to deliver a harsh nicotine kick. But it didn't stop there. To mimic the strong bite of aged spirits, they turned to poisonous chemicals. Recipes for this counterfeit liquor called for additives like turpentine and creosote, the same stuff used to preserve wood and clean industrial equipment. A single glass could cause blinding headaches, seizures, or even death. The nickname rotgut wasn't just a colorful insult, it was a grimly accurate description of what it did to your insides. This wasn't some rare back alley scam. It was a booming, widespread industry thriving in an era with virtually no government oversight. And if you thought switching to beer would be safer, think again. Without refrigeration, beer was served warm, flat, and often stale. Just like the whiskey, it too was sometimes spiked with narcotics to make it seem stronger than it really was. But if you survived the whiskey, the saloon still had one more deadly surprise waiting in the shadows. Number 4. Vice and violence weren't like the movies. The saloon's reputation as a den of vice was earned, but the truth was far less glamorous than Hollywood wants you to think. Take the classic bar brawl, the wild, bottle-smashing free-for-all we've seen 1,000 times on screen. That's pure movie fiction. Real saloon violence was rare, personal, and brutally lethal. Fights didn't erupt into chaotic brawls. They were fast, savage encounters between 2 or 3 men, often over a gambling dispute or a careless insult. And in a place like that, one wrong word could leave a man bleeding in the sawdust. Towns quickly recognized how deadly these encounters could be. That's why many enforced a simple but effective rule. Patrons had to check their firearms at the door. It was an early form of gun control, ensuring most disputes ended with fists instead of bullets. But violence wasn't the main draw that packed saloons every night. Gambling was the real entertainment. Some saloons employed square dealers who earned reputations for fair play, but drifting among them were professional card sharps, slick con artists who traveled from town to town, fleecing newcomers with marked decks and clever tricks. The role of women in saloons is another part Hollywood gets wrong. There was a clear difference between saloon girls and prostitutes. Saloon girls were entertainers, hired to sing, dance, and chat with lonely patrons, all to keep the drinks flowing. For many women, it was one of the few paths to financial independence in a world that offered them almost no choices. Prostitution, meanwhile, was a separate and far more dangerous trade that often operated in the shadows behind the saloon's bright facade. But the biggest threat inside a saloon wasn't a bar fight or a rigged card game. It was the stranger standing next to you. Number 5. Not everyone was welcome. Despite the myth of the Wild West saloon as a lawless free-for-all, these places were surprisingly structured, built around rigid, unwritten rules and sharp lines of exclusion. The saloon was the social hub of the white male frontier, a place where cowboys, miners, lawmen, and outlaws could all cross paths. And quite often, the difference between a lawman and an outlaw was thinner than you'd imagine. But this melting pot had firm, unforgiving boundaries. Respectable women, they wouldn't dare set foot inside. Native Americans and Chinese immigrants, not welcome. And while black men made up a significant part of the West's workforce, they were routinely barred from white-owned saloons, leading them to open their own gathering spots. One group you might not expect to see turned away were U.S. Army soldiers. Incredibly, many saloon patrons viewed soldiers with open disdain. The uniform symbolized federal authority, something fiercely resented in these rough, self-policing towns. Being in the Army didn't grant you respect. More often, it got you shown the door. But once you were allowed in, survival depended on knowing the rules. Even within the accepted group of patrons, behavior was tightly controlled by an unwritten code of conduct. Privacy was sacred. You never asked a man about his past. And there was one ironclad tradition. If someone bought you a drink, you accepted. Refusing a drink was one of the fastest ways to make enemies. The romanticized saloon of Hollywood is pure fiction. The real saloon was a raw, filthy, foul-smelling breeding ground for disease. It served toxic liquor to a select clientele governed by rigid social codes. But this gritty truth is far more powerful than the myth. It reveals an American West not filled with clean-cut heroes, but with real people clawing for survival in a brutal, unforgiving world. So, which part of the real Wild West saloon shocked you the most? Was it the poisonous whiskey, the rampant disease, or the strict social rules? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear from you. And if you thought the saloon was bad, wait until you see what was happening out in the streets. Until next time, folks.